a few years ago, there once was a podcast. That podcast is back. 5-year absence, and myself, Peter Prickett, and my co-host, Garth Smith, we have returned. It was a specifically grassroots podcast, but I think we're going to change that up a little bit. As a lot has happened in that time. And today, I'm mainly going to be asking Garth questions, and we're going to be talking about futsal. And Garth, you've been with Northern Ireland for 3 years now?
December 2016, yeah.
Yeah, nearly 4 years. And you've been coaching smaller, more local teams in the Northern Irish League as well. You were with Banbridge.
That's right. So I was with them for 3 seasons, and then left them in the summer of 2019
to go to Belfast All Blacks.
That's correct, yeah.
Why did you decide to leave Banbridge? Because you were very close to doing the double one season, so obviously things were going pretty well.
It was a bitter end.
What made you decide to change?
Well, it was the season following that. Just a lot of things started to crop up within the playing squad, and personally, the distance that I was traveling felt it was quite tricky to continue that investment when I felt there was only a handful of players that were really showing the same level of commitment as I was. Training sessions were pretty much non-existent. And as a coach, as a teacher, I felt that if I'm going to improve a team or improve any individuals, then there needs to be training happening. What we were getting by on was the ability and the quality of the handful of players who were committed within the team. And
so why Belfast All Blacks? And that wasn't their name initially, was it?
No, they were just called All Blacks. They were just called All Blacks. So there was no name, there was no location attached to them. And it's something that me and you have discussed recently, or certainly in the not too distant past, about how some clubs within England are just called something other than where they exist. So I felt that they needed to have Belfast attached to
the geographical route.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people hear of All Blacks and they automatically think of New Zealand, and rightly so. But with the already existing All Blacks name that the team already had, I felt, putting Belfast at the beginning of it made perfect sense. And I asked the team if that would be okay with them, and they were more than happy. So I went about rebranding the team and did the logo for them and gave them a new badge. So that was quite exciting. I was bringing back my graphic design skills that I used to have in a previous life.
Which has served me very well.
Your book covers, that's right.
Yeah. So, going back to what before I sort of interrupted myself there, what was it about this group of players or this team that made you go, yeah, this is the one for me?
Well, when I was still at Banbridge, we'd played them in a game, and they'd struggled against us, and they'd been struggling throughout the season. But I became friends with their then player coach, and he asked me if I wanted to go up to one of their training sessions just to help out, just to observe one of their sessions, to see how they were running things, to see if what they were doing was futsal appropriate. Was it the game that they were practicing? And it was a pretty decent session, actually. The thing that was missing from their session was the technical detail, the finer things which futsal demands of a player, and they weren't really recognizing that. They weren't noticing that within their session. So I was just there to observe and give a few thoughts and ideas that they could then use to go forward. But what I got from observing that session was that they were a great bunch of lads and that they were very committed. And at the time, I was with Banbridge, and like I've just mentioned, I wasn't really having that commitment, except from a group of maybe 4 or 5 players. And that started to get me thinking, could this be an opportunity for me to join a brand new club, a club who've never had any futsal training before, that are committed to training, that despite their league position at the time, they were generally struggling. Could I come in and give them something that they've never had before, that I could then look at that team 2 or 3 years down the line to see their development, to see how they've improved? Because when I joined Banbridge, the Northern Ireland team had already been established. And so a lot of the Northern Irish players were within the Craigavon, Banbridge area of Northern Ireland. So they already lived there. And so that's how they joined that club at the time. So I didn't really have to develop them. They were already a set group of players and they knew each other. And so they had an idea of what futsal was. They'd already played for Northern Ireland 3 or 4 times by that point. So joining a new club, it just felt like a brand new project.
You mentioned the All Blacks, as they were then, were struggling. There's differing degrees of struggling. How struggling was their, or how much of a struggle was their struggling?
Yeah, I'll sort of clarify that. They weren't struggling as they are struggling now in terms of a league position. I think they were about 5th or 6th in the division, which isn't too bad in terms of, a ranking. And if you're looking at the league table, you might think that they're doing okay. But in terms of their futsal, they weren't playing futsal. And that's something I wanted to try and change. And that's been a challenge this season. It really has.
What was their level of futsal experience? Or indeed, what is their level of futsal experience?
Their level of futsal experience was 0. Their level of futsal experience now is about 6 months old in terms of their futsal experience. So they're babies. You could possibly say that the whole of Northern Ireland is still babies in terms of their futsal knowledge, but a lot of the Northern Irish team certainly have more experience in terms of their international exertions. So yeah, they didn't really have anything, and I'd had something. I'd gained my UEFA B futsal with the English FA, so I had at least had something that I was then bringing to them, which was new and fresh for them.
So are they essentially young players with a reasonable amount of football experience?
It's varied and it's very mixed. I would say about half of my squad could continue to play football as well as futsal on a Sunday, whereas the other half, they're not involved in any other sport whatsoever. They might play recreational 5-a-side football, but other than that, it's just training on a Monday and futsal on a Sunday. They don't invest in anything else.
Have you found that there's any difference between the two levels there, those who play football and how their futsal development is going versus those who don't play football and how their futsal development is going? Or is it the classic, it depends on the individual answer?
I would say in this case, my footballers are probably my better players. And they're certainly perhaps a little bit more driven to want to win. Now, all of them want to win. They're not coming just for a kickabout, but you can see a little bit more pain on their face when we concede a goal, when they miss a chance, that they're really craving it. Whereas with my non-football playing players, they might just go, "Oh, well, that's all right." And there's been a struggle there in terms of trying to balance the competitiveness of my footballing players to the ones who were just turning up for the futsal.
When you came in, did you have a set idea of how you wanted or how you were looking for the team to play? And did that have much relation to what you had been doing previously at Banbridge?
Well, when I was at Banbridge, there wasn't any training, so a lot of it was a 3-1 formation at Banbridge. At All Blacks, I felt from the training sessions that I'd looked at that they were technically pretty sound, that they were competent enough to give them something exciting. And I'd never looked at 4-0 before until I'd joined Belfast All Blacks. So I thought, why not? It gives them something to learn straight away, and it gives me the opportunity to really invest in a strategy and a concept, or various concepts within the 4-0 formation, which we can go on this journey together, that we're developing at the same time, and that I'm giving them futsal because no other team in the division would be playing 4-0. So I thought, well, why not? Why not just give them something that we can all learn from at the same time and go on this journey?
And are you still playing 4-0?
No, no, we're not. That essentially ended after about our third game. So in the entirety of pre-season, we were playing 4-0, and it was pretty successful. I was really pleased with our approach to friendly games. I think we played about 6 friendly games before the season began, and in every one we would play the 4-0 for about 75% of that match. And it was really great. The players seemed to be adapting to it really well. There was a lot of dialogue about the best runs we make, the best timings of parallel passes, 1-2. So what was being created was the language and their understanding of the sport. And the 4-0 is quite an extreme level to be giving, players who don't have any futsal experience. But I felt that their knowledge was being grown because of the 4-0, and that's what it demands. It demands the checked runs, the 1-2s, the blocks, the parallel passes, and it gives players that language to be using on a regular basis. So their knowledge was developing within that formation. But when the season began, that just seemed to go totally out of the window. It must have been, and I've chatted to them about it, the competition side of it, that they must have thought friendly games, it doesn't really matter if I make a mistake. Now, I've constantly said to them, mistakes are going to be part of our journey. They're going to be part of this road that we're taking together as a team. But it seems to have overtaken their decision making. That because there's points on the line, there's no relegation or promotion. So we're currently sat bottom, and if we finish bottom, then nothing happens. We're still in the division next year. But there just seemed to be a breakdown, and I felt that a drastic change had to be made to bring the players back from, because I think it was about 7 games that we'd lost on the bounce, and we hadn't won until about November. We played our 8th game in November, and that's when things started to change for us. But the first 3 or 4 games of the Futsal League were pretty poor in terms of our result. There was moments which were very positive, but there wasn't enough to really build on. We could have continued with the 4-0. I'm not sure if we'd have got any points like we have done at the moment.
And I suppose this question really is for anyone who doesn't really know you and what you do in futsal. Anyone who does should already know the answer to this, but what did you change to?
Well, we went to the fly goalkeeper, the power play. That allowed us to have the ball, because whenever we were in possession, we would lose it within moments. So the power play, the fly goalkeeper, allowed us to keep that ball for maybe an extra 15, 20 seconds most of the time. Allowed us to get a feel for how it felt to be in control of a game, because that's what the fly keeper allows us to do. Even though we may not be the most technical group of individuals, it still allows us time on the ball. It allows the team to breathe and gives them an opportunity to think about what they're doing next, and slows the game down.
And your version of fly doesn't involve the exchanging of a goalkeeper coming off, you use the goalkeeper who started the game as your fly goalkeeper, so you don't have to worry about making that change.
Yeah, the only issue that we have with that now is that the moment that we start fly, sometimes we lose the ball about 5 seconds into it because we force a pass. And so my keeper, who I put on the byline in the opposition half, has jogged himself all the way up to their goal line, and then he finds himself having to jog all the way back, so he gets tired quite quickly. So one of our objectives is to try and keep the ball a little bit longer, and we should be keeping the ball longer because that's the whole purpose of us playing that strategy, to slow the game down, to frustrate the opponent, whereas we seem to be frustrating ourselves at times. Less so now that we're playing the fly than when we were playing the 4-0. We're certainly having a lot more of the ball.
So you would like to play a couple more passes, secure the possession a little bit more before your goalkeeper is having to make that run from out of the goal.
Yes. Now in moments where teams have pressed us, that's probably where we're most effective, that we're having to actually think quicker. It's a strange situation, because when we were playing the 4-0, it was our decision making which was the problem, and because teams were coming to close us down, they're cutting off passing lines, so we just ended up lumping it forward, and it would just end up with the opposition goalkeeper. When teams press us in the fly keeper, I think it's because we know where players are going to be on the court. It feels very much like a football formation, the set positions, whereas in a 4-0, you've got an idea of where players are going to be, but they might have run forward and then they're coming back. The way I do fly is that my players are pretty much rooted to their area of the court. So if we're playing a house formation, which is two players, the two most advanced players in the opponent's half around the goal line, around the byline, and then you've got a deep player, a fix, almost like a central defender, who would be the deepest player in your team, and then you would have two wingers, which would create the sort of the left and the right-sided players. And if you receive the ball, then you've got an idea. Well, I know there's a player down to my left. If I'm receiving it and I'm down on the touchline, I've got either a return pass back to the fix, the central defender, if we're just keeping that as an easy understanding to explain the position. I've got a guy down to my left, a parallel. I've also got a guy in the opposite corner. So I've got options, and I know where these players are going to be. And I think that's where our success of using the flyers came from, because we know where players are, and because we're outnumbering the opponent, then most of the time anyways, whenever we play a pass, it's generally successful.
Have you found the court sizes to be challenging to your use of the fly strategy?
Bigger courts. There's a court in Newry where Northern Ireland play their home games. We've actually struggled on the bigger courts rather than the smaller courts, because the smaller courts you can really force an opponent back and then get shots off pretty much from the halfway line. You don't have to be too close to the goal on a smaller court to take a shot. So the smaller courts actually have been a benefit to us. It's the larger courts where our ability to play firm diagonal passes or jump passes, which may be cutting across the court, which are high risk, but if they're under hit, then it gives the opponent an opportunity to intercept them, and have a shooting opportunity at our goal. So it's actually been the bigger courts which have possibly been the problem for us. So whenever we are playing the fly on a larger court, we would generally get a little bit closer to each other, so the passes aren't having to travel great distances.
Now, we determined that we would try and keep these relatively short, so we've probably only got a few minutes left. What do you think has been your biggest challenge this season?
Introducing the basics to the players. And that's not just futsal basics, it's football basics as well. One of the things that really struck me around about November, December time was their development as footballers, not so much futsal players, because hopefully I'm a good influence on them and their education will improve because of me, and their application. But when I've seen them play, or when I started to see them play as their coach, what I was exposed to was their lack of understanding of the basics within football. In terms of, so for example, 1v1 defending, 2v1 defending. So when there's an opponent and he's got support, how best do you deal with that situation and wait for recovering runs? What I was having players do is just dive straight into a tackle and a pass just being played straight across the court for an opponent player to have an easy shot at goal, and most of the time a goal. It was their lack of good decision making. Everything was rushed. Everything was panicked, and it feels like I don't want to blame anybody, but I would possibly question the coaching experience that they have had from a young age. Who has been coaching them to allow them to develop in such a way which isn't going to improve them as players? What has their coach been like that they've had as youngsters, and I've been then introduced to them as 19, 20-year-old players, and they don't have the basics which I would expect a 12-year-old to have?
That opens up a whole other question about coaching cultures. We are going to wrap up for this week. It's been a bit more of an interview format than I think will be normal, but really interesting for Garth to talk about his experiences in futsal with a new team.
Thanks, Peter. It's been great to have the microphone for once. I know you're probably gagging to have it back next time, but thanks for asking me a few questions about futsal.
Yeah, I won't be this quiet next time. Right. Hope you all enjoyed this. We will catch up with you soon. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Goodbye for now.